Aloha, and we're back with another episode at Mr. Gallardi's office of Oath Keepers Hawaii. I'm here. I brought my son Ryan with me today. We're going to teach the folks at home all about bankruptcy. As you guys know, we are teetering on global collapse, and people are very concerned and ask me all the time about what to do about their finances. And the first thing I would recommend after studying this for years is get out of debt now. So bankruptcy is very, very misunderstood in this country. Everybody associates it with a stigma that you're not paying your bills, but in reality, it's a fresh start that's a legal and lawful remedy to help you move on with your financial world so you don't get crushed. With what's coming up this fall, we believe by the fall we're going to experience one of the largest crashes globally in the world. So we're encouraging folks to learn all about bankruptcy today. Ryan's going to be learning about bankruptcy today. And he's going to be teaching you guys, hopefully through Mr. Glardy, teaching him how this works and how it will benefit your family. So thank you, Ryan, for joining Mom today to help the folks at home learn a little bit more about bankruptcy.
I'm fine with that, but I think Mr. Gallardi is actually
He's got chapter 13
coming
right
to
here.
talk to me in person. Like, he's printing out the things you sent him right now, and then apparently he's gonna walk me through it or something like that. So Mr. Gallardi, my name is Ryan, and I was wondering if you could teach me about bankruptcy or the different kinds of bankruptcies, what's the differences, things like that, how they affect people.
Okay, yeah, Ryan, I can do that. Most people don't realize that the idea of filing bankruptcy is very old.
Mm-hmm.
The original statutes were back in the 1890s, when the federal government decided to take a different view of people who had bad debts. Many, many years ago, you actually could go to jail for not paying a debt, and they were called debtor's prisons.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea was that it's pretty tough to make money if you're in a debtor's prison, because so how can you pay your debt off? So they came up with the Federal Bankruptcy Act, and it is it's a federal thing. Has nothing to do with the state governments. It's a federal government, and it has its own separate courts.
Mm-hmm. Isn't the federal government private? It's like a private corporation, or it's like separate from the state, right? So.
No, the federal government is the overall government for the United States.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a private corporation or anything.
Oh,
it's an institution where we have a constitution and a set of laws. So, but it's our overall way of doing business. But as part of that is the whole federal bankruptcy idea. Now, there are different kinds of bankruptcies, and probably you start off with the very simplest one, and that's what we call a chapter. Bankruptcy trustee, and any of your debts, the trustee will pay himself first, and then if there's any possibility of paying any creditors, he'll pay the creditors, but not normally. They don't normally do that.
Mm-hmm.
But when you come out of bankruptcy, then you're debt free, except for debts that you want to keep. In some situations, for instance, you might want to keep the debt on your car, so that you can keep the car.
Yeah.
Okay, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about Chapter 13. Now, outside of the idea of all your assets being taken and all of your debts being forgiven, there are certain things that are exempt from bankruptcy. In other words, the clothes that you have, probably most of your jewelry that you have. Very important one is the tools of your trade. In other words, if you're a carpenter, you can keep all your
tools.
Yes. You can keep usually a late model vehicle. You couldn't keep a brand new one, but you can keep one that's maybe worth a couple $1,000 so that you have the ability to continue to work. And so while most people when they go into bankruptcy, they just have no assets. They've pretty much used them up to keep life going. And it's a wonderful idea because it takes a tremendous burden off your back. And you get to start fresh, and you really can start fresh. It'll be there on your records that you filed a bankruptcy, but after a year or two, the credit companies and everybody starts looking at you as first thing, you can't file bankruptcy again for 6 years. And I'm not quite sure of that. I think they may have changed that slightly, but you can't just file bankruptcy over and over and over again. And then when you start this new thing, you work on getting a credit card again and maybe a small one and keep it going. And after a while, you can rebuild your credit. And it is a wonderful thing. And it really works. And it was intended by the federal government to be a way for people to not continue to have this terrible debt. Now the problem, of course, is that you lose everything else you have.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's kind of the way it's set up. But you can start over, and that's what the starting over is. Okay, there then is a second type of bankruptcy that we call a Chapter 13 bankruptcy. And it's very similar in some ways to the Chapter 7 in that it does have a trustee who again takes your assets to the extent that he's allowed to. And what you do is you usually enter into an agreement with the bankruptcy court, and it's, in other words, you file what we call a plan. And you say in that plan what you're going to pay and what you're not going to pay. For instance, you might want to keep a car. Quite often for us, it's to somebody to keep their home. And there is no rule of thumb on it. You just have to be able to show the court that you can in fact pay the sums that you've agreed to pay, and that it'll work. In other words, that the court does not want you to enter into something that you can't possibly do. And with homes, it does save homes. It truly does. And the idea is that usually when you file for a Chapter 13 bankruptcy and you do own a home or an apartment or whatever it is, and also a car, and it can be just for a car. I mean, in some cases, that people just need the car to live and go to work. With homes, it's a little different story because then you're trying to save the place where your family live. And it's kind of interesting. Let's say you have a mortgage of $250,000, and you haven't paid the mortgage for the last year. So let's say that the payments on the mortgage are $2,500 a month. Actually, that's pretty high for the $250,000 mortgage. Just say it's $1,000 a month. Now, if you haven't paid for a year, then you have arrearages of $12,000, plus probably some attorney's fees and some other expenses that have been incurred while you're doing this stuff. Because quite often, the house will have been foreclosed on, and the foreclosure process is very slow. So that when somebody hears, "Oh, I'm being foreclosed on," that just means what we call the complaint is filed, and it takes many, many months, in some cases years, to finish it. And usually nowadays, when somebody is in bad condition, they usually owe a year's worth or 2 years worth of back payments. And what in a Chapter 13, assuming that you can get the lender to go along with you, you can take that amount of money that you owe and you actually put it back. You put it on the mortgage itself as further debt.
Oh, and start over basically.
And start over, and usually, hopefully, you can renegotiate the interest rate, and get it into a position where the bank's satisfied that you can pay it, and they're willing to take that amount of money, and you have satisfied the court that you, in fact, can make the payments that are due under the Chapter 13. Now, under the Chapter 13, you can kind of pick and choose who you want to debts you want to keep and debts you don't want to keep. So there may be a bunch of debts that you might even get them discharged in a Chapter 7, and then
so you can do both at the same time.
No, you can't do both at the same time, but you can do both of them at different times.
Oh, okay.
So, for instance, you file Chapter 7, and all the back, you don't owe anything on the mortgage anymore. It's gone. However, there's still a mortgage on that property, and the bank's still entitled to, to take the home.
Yep.
But maybe that's what you wanted to do in Chapter 13. You just get rid of all the back money, and then just assume what's going forward. Doesn't work that way very often, but it can. And that's basically sums it up. I mean, that's it. Now, just for your own education, there's also all kinds of different kinds of bankruptcy. There's a Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which is used to rehabilitate a business. Everybody kind of figures that a business in business is better than a business that fails. It employs people, they pay taxes, they do things that are good things. So the Chapter 11 is set up to help those. Now you can think of many different companies that are huge companies that have gone through Chapter 11s, and they come out the other end and they're fine. I think you remember in the car industry, I can't remember whether they use Chapter 11s or not, but basically the government lent money to the companies that they eventually paid back. But very large companies go into Chapter 11. Some of them make it and some of them don't, but it's a way to keep people employed. It's a way to keep a business going, and as life changes, before they invented the car, building wagons was a big business. After we got the car, building wagons wasn't such a big deal anymore. So obviously, a Chapter 11 for a buggy maker probably wouldn't work after the car was built. The cars were around, and the same thing with now the whole electronic industry. Some of the I remember my father and my uncle owned a business years ago where they sold cash registers and typewriters and adding machines and all kinds of mechanical calculators and things, which all of a sudden went out of just overnight almost became because the computers took over everything very fast. So again, you just have to make sure the business is the right one. And on top of all that, believe it or not, and I think it's called Chapter 9, but I can't remember, maybe it's Chapter 10, because I've never been involved in one, but governmental agencies can go through bankruptcy. For instance, Detroit, Michigan right now is in bankruptcy. And the idea is that the city needs to still provide safety for its people and water, and repair the streets, and so you just can't have the city just completely fall apart. It becomes anarchy. So bankruptcy is a good thing. Nobody wants to go through bankruptcy. I never recommend anybody to go through bankruptcy unless there's no other choice. Is any other questions you might have on it?
So actually, I do have a question. If somebody wanted to begin this journey into bankruptcy, what would be the protocol or procedure to begin, and what would the steps be, or what would they need to bring forth to you to get started?
Well, first thing I could tell you this: you can file bankruptcy by yourself. It's very difficult, but if you really don't have very many assets and you only have a few debts, and you're willing to try it, you can file a Chapter 7 proceeding on your own. Most people don't, because the bankruptcy courts are notorious for being really different than other courts. So the best thing to do is to find out who area does these kinds of things, like I do them, and then you make an appointment usually with the attorney, and then the attorney will set out what you need to bring in. First thing, for the reason you don't bring everything the first time is because the attorney may come up with an idea that you don't have to go through bankruptcy. Maybe there's something else you can do. But once you start into the process, the attorney will be giving you, he wants you to get proof of, how much money do you make? What are your assets? Who are your creditors? And you'll need all that information. You need to know every single creditor, their address, how to get a hold of them, what assets you may or may not have, and nowadays the bankruptcy court, starting in, I can't remember, a decade or so ago, requires you to go through counseling. And the counseling is very good because it does two things. First thing is it tells you what to expect out of bankruptcy. And the second thing, it also counsels you a little bit on how you should conduct yourself in the future. In other words, that you realize that you have to, you can't just get a credit card when you're 19 years old, run it up to $500 and then never pay the doggone thing. You can't do that. I know many years ago they were giving every college student in the world a $500 credit card, and I think it probably destroyed so many young people because they just didn't understand what a credit card really was. To them, it seemed like free money. But so that's basically what you're going to have to do. The bankruptcy court will require that all back taxes be filed. Doesn't mean you have to pay them, but you have to file them. Okay, and I think that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Okay.